How you doing, everyone, and welcome to Dreadnought Gundam and More on PS4. And this is a new series I'm starting called Legendary Journey, which is a roadmap to getting into Legendary mode and how to fast track your ship and prepare yourself for the carnage that is Tier 4 and Tier 5. I do have a couple really good replays and a player-submitted replay cast from Scroat, and I think I will be getting back to that kind of content during the holiday season, but there was a very good reception for the State of the Meta video for Dreadnought, and much to my surprise, there really wasn't much disagreement on my assessment of the current state of the meta in the Dreadnought game on the PS4 server. I'm not too sure about PC as I do not play on Steam, but for PS4 I think most players are in agreement on what are the most effective ways to use the 15 ship types in Dreadnought for Legendary mode. In this series we're going to step back a little, and instead of focusing on the content which is provided by me or players that watch or subscribe to my channel who are already in Legendary mode, I think that I would concentrate on players that are in Tier 3 and are preparing to enter Legendary mode, or players who may have one or two ships already and are fighting in Legendary mode but would like to expand their horizons and get other ships into Tier 4 and Tier 5 to better enjoy the game of Dreadnought and have a more diverse, fun time when playing the game. So I would like to start with destroyers, even though Dreadnoughts are the iconic ship of the game, what the game is indeed named after. It is destroyers that require a lot of nuance and have a lot of debate on how to play properly, and I also see many destroyer captains getting destroyed and losing heart in the game, losing their confidence as they are taken out quite easily. As Scroat said, the destroyer is a very temperamental ship. It can be easily taken out by artillery cruisers if played incorrectly, and even though artillery cruisers are allegedly the bane of Dreadnoughts, they can actually do a considerable amount of damage to destroyers, since destroyers have no innate armor boosting abilities. Destroyers are just squishy enough to be taken out by just about any other ship, including corvettes, but offer a tremendous amount of firepower and are at times the only ships that can break the dreaded heel ball if played properly. So we're going to start our journey right now in Tier 3, and I thought of the three destroyer classes we would start with, of course, Jupiter Arms as the medium long-range destroyer line in the game of Dreadnought. So let's go into ships right now and take a look at what we have in Tier 3. Now, I could go into a little about how to use destroyers in Tier 1 and Tier 2, but let's face facts that in Tier 1, Tier 2, there's really not much choice of destroyers, only Jupiter Arms, and the game really doesn't diversify the modules enough to get a good feel for destroyer combat. So we're going to start in Tier 3 with the Otranto, and we see here, of course, that we have Particle Turrets 3 and Flak Turrets 3. Now, they have been trying to buff Particle Turrets 3 for a long time, and maybe they do have their uses, but I have to say, and I don't mean this in a bad way, that Flak Turrets 3 are the ultimate meta. They aren't overpowered in my opinion because they are really good at what they do. They're very short range. They are the corvette killer and are also very damaging to other ships. So it's really no contest. You may pick up the Light Particle Turrets 3 if you so choose, or if you just need to purchase a module to get to the next level, but you want to be using Flak Turrets 3 the entire time and want to upgrade them as soon as possible. Now, usually when you come in from Tier 2, you are equipped with the Tempest missiles, and let me tell you, the Tempest missiles are not very exciting. They are not the big, spectacular, game-ending, overblown, overpowered module, but they are very consistent and very long range. And when compared to other missiles such as the Vulture missiles, they are actually a little bit faster and track a little bit better than the contemporary missiles of other classes. So you actually want to at least bring Tempest missiles into Tier 4. And if you're asking me my opinion, I think Tempest missiles are the missiles, the main primary module that you want to stick with in the game to bring yourself into Legendary. And indeed, when you reach Legendary mode in Tier 4, Tier 5, many players still use Tempest missiles because they have the highest DPS and the lowest cooldown, the most bang for your buck of any missile in the Destroyer class. Right now we have the Goliath torpedo, and you can pick it up if you want, but I have to admit I can't stand the Goliath torpedo, especially on the Jupiter Arms destroyers, because it really defeats the whole point of the Jupiter Arms destroyer with its excellent guns that do so much damage at such long range with such a low cooldown reload that you really don't want to be going into close range. This is the realm of the Vindicta Oberon destroyer, or sometimes the Aquila Vector destroyers. You really don't want to be using the Goliath torpedo in Jupiter Arms, and I have plenty of footage to prove why. If I had a nickel for every time a noob hit themselves with their own Goliath, I mean, I would be a millionaire. It's just awful. Next, we're going into Storm missiles. Now, the thing with Storm missiles is they used to be very powerful, but were always weak in Tier 3, and again, draws Jupiter Arms destroyers in a range they're not very comfortable with. Now, you do see that flak is a close range weapon, but that is only for emergencies, getting rid of corvettes, or just ending close range engagements once and for all in your favor. But Storm missiles really don't have a place on your Tier 3 Jupiter Arms destroyer. Again, you want to be using Tempest missiles. That gives you firepower, very good tracking at long range, where you can simultaneously use the best thing about your destroyer, which is its guns. You want to be using the guns all the time. You don't want to be sneaking around trying to get really close to use Storm missiles, because you are going into a range in which other ships want you. Same thing with the Plasma Ram. Feel free to pick Plasma Ram up if you just need a module to get to Tier 4, but you really don't want to be using it. You can use it for fun, and again, in this series you can do any build you want, but if you want my advice, you really want to be sticking with the Tempest missiles in Tier 3. These are the missiles that will get you to Tier 4, and even when you reach Tier 4, Tier 5, you may still use them even after that. So, you may want to pick these up for use in Tier 4, but it's the Tempest missiles that are going to carry the day. For our secondary module, we're looking at Torpedo Salvo 3. This is another solid weapon that you want to be bringing in to Tier 4. This is excellent mainly because it has such a low cooldown, decent damage, and it does not trigger missile warning. So if you're having problems with corvettes, the Torpedo Salvo 3 is going to nail corvettes, especially inexperienced ones. They will have no idea what hit them, and after you use these torpedoes, they will be off cooldown very soon, and as they increase in tier, you are talking about using Torpedo Salvo every 10 seconds. However, they are in the 3,000 meter range, so this is a secondary weapon if there ever was one. You want to be using this when someone encroaches upon you in close range. You don't want them there, so you give them some torpedoes and some flak and get out of there, and then finish them off with your guns and Tempest missiles. So next we're looking at the Weapon Breaker missile. For low tier play, this is a really good missile. You can pick this up and have it for tier 4 in case you lose interest in it later, but it'll still be there and the effect is still there. The thing about status missiles is using lower tier status missiles is just fine. If you use a tier 3 Weapon Breaker missile in tier 4, you're really not losing out on a lot of damage or cooldown. This thing will provide you with its primary function, which is to disable essentially the weapons of another ship. This is really handy for Jupiter Arms. If you're dueling with another ship at medium to long range, you can instantly defeat their DPS while still maintaining yours, it's still a pretty good missile to use. Drain torpedoes, this is a torpedo that is handy, but again, look at the range on this thing. It's 2400. This is more of a weapon that wants to be used on Oberon or Akula Vector destroyers, but feel free to pick it up. But again, in this class, I'm going to have to say that my suggestions to go along with the Tempest missile is to use Torpedo Salvo 3 for close encounters that you really don't want, or to use Weapon Breaker missile to win duels. Now we're getting into our third module set, and we are looking at the Scramble Pulse. Again, this is something you could pick up, but not very useful in a long-range destroyer that's really an escort destroyer if you think about it. You really don't want to be using the Scramble Pulse because you have to get in within 1,000 meters of your target, which is flak range, but in order to get there, you're eating so much fire, and you just don't have the hull to have those close brawls with other destroyers or dreadnoughts or even corvettes, so this really isn't going to help you out much. Protean auto guns, meh, I'm just not impressed. You can pick them up if you want, but you have no missile defense, so you really don't want to be getting that close. Same thing with the Scramble Pulse. You just don't want to be getting that close with these two modules. So, the module for Tier 3 that will carry the day and bring you into Tier 4 and probably still be used in Tier 4 and beyond, as I use it on my primary build to this day in Tier 5, is the Weapon Booster Pulse 3. This has an excellent radius, even at low tier, with 1,600 meters, meaning anyone that is within 1,600 meters of you who's a friendly is going to get 75% extra damage to their main guns, and if they are using power to weapons, that is basically giving them double damage with 5 pulses. The weapon boost duration is 12 seconds, and of course the pulse lasts for about 3 seconds, so that's really 15 seconds on the last pulse. It's really, really good. It provides a lot of extra damage, and for your guns, this is the module that will boost the Otranto and the Vigo's guns. Even in Tier 4, you activate this, you can't go wrong. It's going to boost your weapons at medium to long range, or if someone comes in too close, you can hit this thing and use flak, and any other ships that are near you can help win that close range engagement, especially against corvettes. So really, for me, when I was going through Tier 3 in the Otranto and I just wanted to get out of there, I was in the doom and gloom days where we had Tier 4s in veteran mode, and they just beat the snot out of us, especially ships like the Vindicta and the Jutland. They just came in and did so much damage. This was part of my build. It was a staple, and it enabled me to do tremendous amounts of damage and get to the Vigo that much faster. I used Tempest missiles, Torpedo Salvo, Weapon Booster Pulse, and the fourth choice for my Tier 3 build for the Otranto, Weapon Amplifier 3. This is a great little module that gets overshadowed by Tier 4 modules, and I really stopped using it. It's not worth using once you get access to internal module slots for Tier 4. But when you are in Tier 3 and you are fighting other veteran ships, this in conjunction with Weapon Booster Pulse is just what the Otranto needs. It gives so much damage boost, and you are boosting your allies with Weapon Booster Pulse 3, boosting yourself, and it stacks with Weapon Booster Pulse, and Weapon Amplifier adds 60%. You do power to weapons as 90% plus 75%. You're doing more than 2.5 times damage with your guns. It's just excellent. Or you can not use power to weapons and put power into maneuver or shields and still do tremendous amounts of damage. And even at Tier 3, look at that cooldown at 35 seconds. That is just great. Something that you want on your destroyer. Right here we have module reboot. Later on in Tier 4, Tier 5, this has some uses, but it's really not worth the 120-second cooldown in Tier 3 to have this module. And what are you going to module boost? You're going to module boost your primary and secondary modules. These already have a pretty low cooldown, and let me tell you, they're not going to win you your engagements. Your primary guns, the highest DPS guns in the game on Jupiter Arms Destroyers, are what win you your engagements, and you want to be at medium to long range. So really I'm saying that the module reboot is not worth getting. Energy Generator is the only one here that I would say has a rival for Weapon Amplifier. Weapon Amplifier is giving you such tremendous damage and enabling you to use your power for defense, but if you find yourself in a sticky situation or want a secondary build for your B variant on your Otranto, the Energy Generator 3 is what will give you that extra power, that extra defense, that extra speed. So it's pretty good. I would go with either one of these. I personally lean towards Weapon Amplifier 3. Jump Drive 3 will get you in more trouble than not, but I did use it when I first started playing the game in Jupiter Arms Destroyers. It does get you into close range, but you don't want to be in close range in the first place, and it does sometimes get you out of trouble, but then again, so will Power 2 engines and good map use and cover. So I do not recommend this. It just doesn't travel far enough. It doesn't do it fast enough. It has too much of a charge of time. It's still much quicker than a Dreadnought, but more often than not, you're going to be killed on your way out. So I would just stick with Energy Generator if you're defensive minded and have more power to shields and more power to engines, or go full tilt into your weapons, stay at long range, use the map to your advantage, and combine that with Weapon Booster Pulse 3, Tempest missiles, or Weapon Breaker missile for winning duels, or torpedoes to take out corvettes or add a little bit more damage at close range. So my picks to get you into Tier 4 be Flak, Tempest, Torpedo Salvo or Weapon Breaker Missile, Weapon Booster Pulse, and either Energy Generator 3 or Weapon Amplifier 3. So you can take your modules into Tier 4, of course, and when you get to Tier 4, you are going to be using the Vigo. And the Vigo is a very fine ship. It is purposely not as effective as the Athos. The Vigo does have a rival as far as weapon power goes with Aquila Vector. And of course you have to compete with the close range Vindicta Destroyer, but the Vigo is still very competitive. It has a decent amount of mobility and firepower. It still has the best guns in my opinion in Tier 4, but it's not as pronounced as with the Athos, where the Athos has far and away the best guns in Tier 5. But in Tier 4, the Blood is a good rival for you, although your weapons are easier to aim and travel a little faster and have a better reload. Again, we have our choice of light particle turrets. I would go with flak turrets for whenever possible. And of course, we see while we're up here, we have Nerves of Steel. This got a small buff a long time ago, and ever since then it's been a very effective, very good officer briefing to use on Jupiter Arms Destroyers and a couple other ships too, and I highly recommend getting it at your convenience. But to use Nerves of Steel properly, you have to know when to put power to engines, and you have to be able to maneuver very well, and you have to be able to use map cover to your advantage, and you also have to know when to not use Nerves of Steel and just throw up your shields to absorb damage spikes. But a very good officer briefing indeed. We have the tried and true and tested Tempest missiles for. Notice the damage, notice the cooldown is getting better. 40 seconds, that's going to get just better in Tier 5. 17,000 damage, range 7,000. They travel faster than vultures and track better than vultures. You just can't go wrong with Tempest missiles, especially if you are staying in the range of 4,000 to 7,000 meters like you should in the Vigo. Right here we have Missile Repeater 4. This got me through a lot of very tough matches. It is an excellent weapon. Just when you're getting into close range, you're peppering them at long range, getting into medium range, right when you get to 4,000 meters, you launch these, and even if they don't clobber whatever you're trying to hit, if they separate and the target is destroyed, they will go after another target. There are downsides to the repeaters though. Hell lasers can shoot the main warhead before the little flechettes separate out of the main warhead. Also, if the target is destroyed or goes out of 5,000 range before the warheads separate, the missiles will fizzle out. So this has some drawbacks, but let me tell you, this has the most bang for your buck. It has a long cooldown, but does tremendous amounts of damage, and it's very satisfying when you finish off a target with your guns before the missile repeaters get there, and then they separate and lock onto another target like a tactical or corvette and just totally obliterate them. I highly recommend this module. Flashpoint torpedo salvos, a favorite of mine on Oberon destroyers. They can be effective on Akula Vector as well, but they're not really good on Jupiter arms. You can incorporate them into your build and modify your play style to prove me wrong, but I'm telling you that you have to get too close, and the Jupiter arms destroyers are just too squishy to effectively use flashpoint torpedoes as well as other ships. Plasma ram, don't get it. Goliath torpedo, I hate it. Storm missiles now do more damage. They don't do as much damage as they used to. You can use them, but this is more for Akula Vector or Oberon. Again, you just have to close in too close to use them effectively. You can add them to your arsenal, but I don't recommend it. We're going to skip the rams and get to the Scylla torpedo. Scylla torpedo has gotten much better. I highly recommend it now. It can fire at 7,000 meters just like the Tempest missiles, and it has seemingly low damage, but it's a damage spike. It's hard to notice, it's hard to shoot down, very effective, and a fairly low cooldown. Now we're down with Torpedo Salvo 4. This is a solid close range weapon which can be used on Jupiter arms destroyers pretty effectively. Again, they don't trigger missile warnings, so they'll catch especially corvettes but other ships by surprise. And look at the cooldown, 16 seconds, and that's just going to get better in Tier 5. A pretty darn good torpedo. Drain torpedoes, kind of average. You have to get too close to use them. But here we have the star of Tier 4, and many players still use this on all three destroyer types, and that is light flechettes at the range of 4,000. Many missiles, 30 warheads to overwhelm anti-missile defenses, and pretty darn good damage at 9,900 if they all hit, which they won't, but you're averaging 5,000 to 6,000 and only 40-second cooldown. Great for overwhelming defenses and for chasing away corvettes or even destroying them. Weapon booster missile, when compared to flechettes or some of the other modules in Tier 4, no longer holds the same prestige or power they did in Tier 3. But if you have them in Tier 3 and brought them into Tier 4 and you don't have the experience to get some of these other great modules, I would continue using it until you can get something better. I don't know that I would invest in a Tier 4 version of this missile, though. Weapon booster missile just never really caught my eye. You're boosting someone else, and that can be great when you're using team tactics, but let's face it, tacticals can do it better because they're busy healing anyway, and the whole point of the Vigo, the Athos, and the Otranto is to bring your guns to bear at long to medium range and put that DPS out there. You want to be boosting yourself, not other players, unless you're using, of course, Weapon Booster Pulse, which does both and is a much better investment. So these two missiles no longer really effective. Flechettes, very good. Drain Torpedo, very lackluster. Torpedo Salvo is solid. And now we're getting to, besides flechettes, the other primary choice for most destroyer captains in Tier 4 and Tier 5 is the Disruptor Missile. The Disruptor Missile enables you to take out enemy modules for 10 or more seconds with a fairly low cooldown, very fast firing. It can be taken out by anti-missile lasers, but still it is there and used in medium to close range. If you use it at long range, it's not really as effective, but if you wait and hold it for the right time, the Disruptor Missile can win you engagements bar none. It can take out Dreadnought armor amplification, it can disrupt tactical cruiser shenanigans, it can even scare away a corvette. Disruptor Missile is a little more effective on Oberon destroyers, but still has a place on Jupiter arms. But most Jupiter arms long-range captains who are really effective and really a threat are using flechettes. We have Weapon Booster Pulse. Weapon Booster Pulse is solid. Get it even if you don't use it. It's a good module to experiment with. It will get you extra points, it will get you extra damage, and it will make your team stronger. It is worth investing into, even if you don't use it as your primary module for your third module slot. I would get it anyway and maybe use it on a different build. Anti-missile lasers, pretty darn effective on the destroyer. Look at those stats. They are worth taking even when compared to Hell lasers because they have so many turrets firing, especially in Tier 5, a very low refire rate, and a very small range, which you think is a disadvantage, but it's actually an advantage because you're not shooting down missiles that are heading to your friends. You are shooting down just those horrible blobs of missiles heading to you. Very low cooldown when compared to artillery cruisers as well, or dreadnoughts, and a fairly long duration at 20 seconds. Pretty darn good module to have even if you don't use it. Scramble Pulse, not really for Jupiter arms. It's not going to do much for you. Same thing with Drain Pulse. You have to close in too quickly to use it. Protean autoguns, same story. Hell lasers, very, very good module. At Tier 4, I think it's a little better than Tier 5, but Tier 5, I still use them on certain builds. They target all missiles and torpedoes, but prioritize nukes. Only 2 turrets firing, and has the same duration and cooldown as anti-missile lasers. In Tier 5, the choice is, do I want to get excellent missile defense for myself, or provide decent missile defense for myself and also cover your team from nukes as well as defend yourself? So either of those are just fine. We have Module Reboot. This is worth taking in Tier 4 because certain builds will definitely benefit from it. And unlike Tier 3, you will find uses for it even if it's not in your primary build. I would pick this up after you already have your favorite modules in your collection. Weapon Amplifier was really good in Tier 3, but is just not there in Tier 4. It can be used in Tier 4 pretty darn effectively, but there's much better choices for your internal module slot. I would pick it up anyway for certain builds. Look, 70% weapon damage boost with 75% for weapon booster pulse. You'll notice that Weapon Amplifier, the boost gets better as long as the duration, but weapon booster pulse, it's really the number of pulses and the duration of the pulses that get better. So, still worth taking. Thrust Amplifier, don't take it on Jupiter arms. It's going to do nothing for you. Same thing with Jump Drive. Stasis Ammo, whether you use it or not, have this module in your collection for taking down Vindictas and Corvettes. I know it's contradictory because you want to keep those guns screaming on the Vigo and the Athos, but in certain builds this is worth taking, and it is the #1 anti-Corvette module recommended by Scrote and Persistent Flame. This is the one that annoys Corvettes the most, just stunning them and making them easy to hit for the rest of your team. This is something you probably more want to take on Aquila Vector, but it still has its place in Jupiter arms. This is probably my favorite module in the game. Many players don't use it. I swear by it. This plus Nerves of Steel is what makes my destroyer so hard to kill. When combined with Nerves of Steel and Power 2 engines and evasive maneuvers, if you get shot mid-evasive maneuver and you have Nerves of Steel activated with Power 2 engines, you, depending on the damage you take and how often you're hit, can boost as quick as a Corvette, getting 4, sometimes 5 times normal speed in very quick bursts. And it's very hard to hit. It closes a lot of ground, and with the Vindicta, it gets you in there, but with the Vigo and Athos, it gets you out of there too. You can just run down other ships and make a hasty retreat, get some distance, and it's a really good module to own. It does take a little practice using, but I highly recommend it. Energy Generator, not as good in Tier 4 when compared to Stasis Ammo, when compared to Evasive Maneuver, when compared to Module Reboot or Weapon Amplifier. It is good on other destroyers, and we'll get to that momentarily, but I would say for your Vigo, what's going to get you into Tier 5, what's going to complete your legendary journey is flak turrets, weapon booster pulse, maybe hell lasers, stasis ammo or evasive maneuvers with energy generator, and of course module reboot for certain builds, and a whole host of excellent weapons. You can't go wrong with Tempest missiles. You can't go wrong with missile repeaters. I highly recommend missile repeaters. The Scylla torpedo is really good. You really want light flechettes or disruptor missile depending on your preference. I have different builds with each of them because they're great for different scenarios. And of course, that completes our journey to legendary for Jupiter Arms. Afterwards, we get to the Athos, and once you get to the Athos, you're really keeping up the same strategy, except that you really want to focus on your guns. My primary build for the Athos, which is very meta right now for Jupiter Arms captains, is either Scylla torpedo or Tempest missiles. Look at that 35-second cooldown, 20,000 damage, very fast, track excellent, 7,000 meters, 14 missiles. That's pretty darn good. We get to the Scylla torpedo, 40-second cooldown, very competitive, 14,400 damage, range 8,000, and a blast radius to boot. Two excellent weapons, but if you were like me and you still like that 27,200 multiple warhead goodness of missile repeaters, feel free to use them as well. Three excellent choices in Tier 5. In Tier 5, we really have just the flechettes or disruptor missile. Torpedoes are still kind of good, and they're really good in Tier 5, but Jupiter Arms really benefits from either the disruptor missile or light flechettes the most. For your proximity slot, you really don't want these pulses. The anti-missile lasers, highly recommended. 4 turrets firing at once, refire time 0.2 seconds. That means that these turrets are firing 5 times a second. This is the really good missile defense modules other ships wish they had, with a 25-second duration and a 35-second cooldown, meaning these babies are operating 2/3 of the match, giving you the best missile protection in the game. Look at these stats, just excellent. We have Hell lasers with same kind of cooldown and duration, but the refire time did not improve. Only 2 turrets firing, but they can take down nukes as well as missiles and torpedoes. Highly recommended. I use these when I'm not using my pick for Tier 5, which is the Weapon Booster Pulse, which makes the Athos guns completely ridiculous. But if you're being hunted, Hell lasers or anti-missile lasers are very good for keeping enemy disruptor missiles and corvette torpedoes away from you and keeping you safe. As far as the last module slot for Jupiter Arms, I'm going to have to again recommend evasive maneuver or stasis ammo, and for certain builds, module reboot, but those are the modules that you really want to focus on your Athos. Keep that gun power up, keep the distance between you and the target, and of course boost your allies and get their weapons doing almost double damage wherever possible. Now let's move into Akula Vector, and I don't want to cut Akula Vector short after spending so much time on Jupiter Arms, but to be honest, not much changes with Akula Vector, but Akula Vector gives you some things that Jupiter Arms just doesn't give you. In Tier 3, we go to the Dola, and the story is basically the same. You can have a little more freedom with your additional hull to experiment with getting close in and using torpedoes and Goliath Torpedo 3. You can absorb a lot of firepower to the face on your way in and still make it out just fine and still deliver devastating damage with the Goliath Torpedo or Storm missiles. I still recommend Tempest missiles because you're not going that fast, and it's good for finishing off enemies at long range or reaching out and touching artillery cruisers to keep their heads down, keep them dodging, while you close into medium range, which is really, medium range is the name of the game for Akula Vector. You still do excellent damage at Long range, you still do with flak turrets, which is what I recommend. You still do excellent damage with flak turrets at close range, but now you can survive medium to close range engagements. Tempest missiles gives you options at long range where your guns aren't very accurate, but you can close in and use storm missiles or maybe even experiment with the Goliath. As for RAM, I would stay away from it. You really can do it just to prove good old math wrong, but it's really the worst destroyer to try RAM with. Torpedo salvo, very, very excellent on a Akula Vector because torpedo salvo is going to nail those annoying corvettes you just can't keep up with. However, weapon breaker missile is still really good for trading blows with other ships. I would stay away from drain torpedo unless you're really closing in to try and use the Goliath, but you're really trying to press too many buttons at the same time at the same range. That's why I recommend using Tempest missile at long range, torpedo salvo at close range, or using storm missile at close range and weapon breaker missile at long range. Again, you still have not as good as guns as Jupiter arms, but still worth boosting, and you also boost your allies who are probably going to be closer to you. Scramble Pulse, not really worth taking, but you can bring it into tier 4 for certain builds. Protean auto guns, a little better on a Akula Vector than Jupiter arms, but I still recommend Weapon Booster Pulse 3. As far as your internal slot for tier 3, module reboot doesn't help you enough yet. It really is a tier 4, tier 5 weapon. It's not worth losing that one module slot to make your Tempest missiles fire twice when all of them could hit a building or miss, or your torpedoes already have such a low cooldown. It's not worth taking, but Energy Generator is. Even though Weapon Amplifier is really good for the same reasons as it is on Jupiter arms, for Akula Vector, Energy Generator 3 I think is the way to go for Akula Vector. It makes you so much more tankier. You're going to be hit more because you're bigger, but you have so many hull points and your shields are so darn good at 75% shield mitigation. When you activate the Energy Generator 3 and you're already locked in medium or close range combat, Energy Generator 3 is going to seal the deal and get you through the day. And it's really, really good. As for jump drive, it's a Akula Vector. Come on, how are you going to use jump drive effectively? You can jump in and storm missile someone, I guess, at 12,960 damage, but what good is that going to do you once you get there? And it's not going to save you. If you're almost dead and you try to jump away, you're so slow and big, they're just going to get you. Stay in the fight, fight hard, stay near your friends, and use Energy Generator and Weapon Booster Pulse. Be a pal. Now we're going to go to tier 4, and tier 4 is where we have the Blood, and the Blood is a fine, fine vessel. The Blood is really kind of a little better than it really should be at tier 4. They just didn't want to give Jupiter arms the run of the place, so they made the Athos really good and they made the Vigo a little lackluster. Just like the Strybog is lackluster, but the Netron is really powerful. You see that in a lot of ships where they kind of wax and wane between tiers. Stick with flak, okay? For the opposite reason of Jupiter arms. With Jupiter arms, you're trying to keep your distance and ships intrude upon your personal space and you get rid of them. With the Gore, you're going to get stuck in at medium close range because you're slow and heavily armored, and flak is the perfect way to deal with that. Light particle turrets, not so much because your guns are already so powerful on the Blood. What is the point? You might as well keep the flak turrets for close range encounters, especially when you want those encounters. Tempest missile, still a solid module for Akula Vector. Same thing with many of these, except that when you're using missile repeater or storm or Tempest missiles, now things like storm and of course Scylla or even Goliath are more viable on the Blood and the Gora. Flashpoint torpedoes even, you can have a decent flashpoint along with torpedo salvo and other secondary modules, so you have much more freedom on Akula Vector at the sacrifice of a little bit of mobility and gun power, but a whole lot of hull points gives you the freedom to really expand and thrive in medium to close range. For our secondary modules, we have Drain Torpedo, which is much better on Akula Vector because you're already in that medium range category. It's not too hard to use. It takes down Dreadnought shields, takes down Destroyer shields. Really, really effective. Flechettes, very, very effective, just like with Jupiter Arms. Weapon Breaker Missile, again, it has its uses, but it kind of tapers off in Tier 4 and Tier 5. It's not as good as it is in Tier 3. Weapon Booster Missile, there's no reason to have it on Akula Vector. You really want to be maximizing your firepower at medium to close range. Torpedo Salvos, excellent, excellent choice for Akula Vector. They pair well with things like the Missile Repeater, like the Goliath or Scylla Torpedo or Storm Missiles. You're just a close range monster with this thing. Same thing with Drain Torpedo. It's really, really good. You can either go long range with Tempest Missile or medium range with the Missile Repeaters or close range with Storm Missile and Goliath, and pair it well with any of these torpedoes. And of course you have Disruptor Missile, which many captains use on Akula Vector as well. So such a freedom of modules, and that goes along with missile defense as well. Since you are slower and much larger of a hitbox, the Jupiter Arms Destroyer is very, very thin and wedge shaped, so certain angles are dangerous for it. It's like a leaf falling in the wind. Certain angles you don't want artillery cruisers aiming at you from above or below. If you stay with your nose towards the enemy or you're running away with your engine towards the enemy, you're a very small hit profile, hitbox for Jupiter Arms. Not so much with Akula Vector. With Akula Vector, everyone can hit you. You are as easy to hit as a Jutland or a Monarch. It's really ridiculous. You have to count on your hull and shields to carry the day, and that is amplified with Hell lasers or anti-missile lasers. Very, very effective. Your guns still benefit from Weapon Booster Pulse. I use Weapon Booster Pulse on many of my Akula Vector Destroyer builds, but your guns aren't as accurate as Jupiter Arms. The bullets don't travel as fast. You're not doing as much damage. You can still boost allies and get point bonuses in your match by boosting allies, but Hell lasers, very effective. Anti-missile lasers, very, very effective on Akula Vector. Protean auto guns, better on Akula Vector than Jupiter Arms, but I wouldn't recommend them. You have to get too close to use them, and they just don't do it. They just don't put out the damage as some of these other modules do. We have a lot of freedom for Akula Vector in the internal module slot. You have Energy Generator, highly recommended, along with Retaliator, especially for a close range build. You go in there, use your hull points and shields to survive, and then when you're in the thick of it, unleash close range firepower with Torpedo Salvo, with Storm Missiles, with Missile Repeaters, with Flashpoint Torpedoes, with Goliath, with Flechettes, and then use Energy Generator to soak up even more damage and get a faster cooldown on any of these missiles. Also, look at, of course, Module Reboot. Same story here. Close in, unleash firepower, reboot, unleash more firepower, and then you don't have to worry about running away because everyone else around you is dead. I use evasive maneuvers on my Akula Vector Destroyers, but I don't recommend it because it is good if you're used to using them, but there's so many more options. You can use them if you want. I would say buy it for sure, but experiment with other builds. I just use it because I'm so used to using it, and it really has better alternatives. It's just a personal preference of mine. Stasis ammo, absolutely gorgeous on Akula Vector. Have a problem with ships running away from you because you're so slow? Slow them down too and watch the missiles and the bullets land. It's just wonderful. If they can't dodge your bullets, the gore and the blood, it's just almost as good as Jupiter Arms. If they are stationary, they're taking so much damage from your guns, so much damage from your missiles. Stasis ammo, pick it up for Akula Vector. Jump drive, I have seen some builds pull off jump drive in Akula Vector. It's not my first choice. You can pick it up if you want, experiment with it. Thrust amplifier, why put a turbo on a scooter? It's just it's not doing it for you. You want thrust amplifier on a fast ship. You want things to boost defense on a slow defensive ship like Aquila Vector. So when we're talking about both the blood and the gore, we have tremendous amount of freedom. You are a mid-range brawler. You can survive at any range in this game. And the Gora, even though it is not as awesome as the Athos as far as gun power, still has incredible guns. They fire a little slow, but they pack such a wallop. Rocket turret's not going to help you. You really want to stick with flak. You have such freedom to use long-range missiles like Tempest missiles or missile repeaters or Scylla torpedo, or get close up and nasty with storm missiles, Goliath torpedoes, flashpoint torpedoes, flechettes. Can't go wrong with flechettes. Can't go wrong with disruptor missile. Torpedo salvo, very good if you're a close range brawler. Using Goliath torpedoes or flashpoint torpedoes or storm missiles pairs very well with them. So does disruptor missiles. Drain torpedo kind of losing its power and prestige in tier 5. Same thing with weapon breaker and weapon booster. Hell lasers still pretty darn good. Same thing with anti-missile lasers on Aquila Vector, especially if you're a slow tanky build. Drain pulse not going to help you as much, but I've seen it on many builds. Scramble pulse, forget about it. Weapon booster pulse, very good if you are using things like Tempest missiles or Scylla torpedo at long range. And of course we have energy generator to make you even more tanky, or module reboot to make you even more vicious, or stasis ammo to troll things that are faster than you, which, let's face it, you're Aquila Vector, almost everything is, or evasive maneuvers as well. So many choices, such a great ship line. Very versatile. So let's step out and get to Oberon. Oberon destroyers don't start in tier 3, so once you get through tier 3 with Aquila Vector or Jupiter Arms, you're going to want to unlearn everything you've learned when you step into the Vindicta. It is in a class of its own. It is extremely fast, but is roughly the same amount of durability as some Corvettes. We're talking about the Netron, the Strybog, or even the Mithras. The Vindicta has very little hull. But you want flak turrets, that's for sure. Vindictas don't even recognize light particle turrets as a reality. They're just a fantasy, they're fiction. Flak turrets is all that you will find on a player in a Vindicta. Some bots use them, but it is just comedy. Goliath torpedo is what they start you out with, and you will get a couple of really good kills with this when you are first playing the Vindicta, but I wouldn't invest in Goliath torpedo 4. No way, no how. If it hits you, it's going to obliterate you. 20,000 damage. You can't take a hit like that, and it's probably not even going to hit the target anyway. You want to go in and surprise your opponent, and you want to ram. There are some really good builds that use flashpoint torpedoes. Missile repeaters are good when you are starting out and you don't have enough points to get all the modules to pull it all together to make you a good rammer. You stand back, duck in to 4,000 meters, duck out, rinse, repeat. It'll get you the points temporarily, but it's only a stopgap measure. You really want to be saving up for the plasma ram, the rupture ram, but I would say the plasma ram. Scylla torpedo is not really worth taking because you don't want to be dueling other destroyers or artillery cruisers at long range. You want to be using the map and cover to your advantage, and you want to get that ram. And if you don't like ramming and you're not good at it, you want to use flashpoint torpedoes, which are basically a 360-degree short-range missile ram. You're taking very powerful torpedoes at almost ram range and use them even on targets behind you. But you really want to practice ramming. Blast ram, not as good as plasma ram or rupture ram. Rupture ram, you want to go in there, you want to use rupture ram, then drain pulse, then flak. It's a party. Or do the opposite. You want to go in there, disruptor them, use plasma ram. Practice ramming. It's worth it. It's what the Vindicta was made to do, and same thing with the Brutus. But if you're uncomfortable with ramming or you want something new, go ahead and try flashpoint torpedoes. Light flechettes are good on the Vindicta, but you don't want to try to ram a target and have it throw up its defenses. Disruptor missile is what most captains recommend in this ship. If you aren't using disruptor missile, it's because you're either a genius or an idiot. So you really want that in your collection even if you don't use it. I used torpedo salvo for a long time when on my Bravo build for my Vindicta. There are a lot of artillery cruisers. I used to sneak up and flash torpedo one and then go in and torpedo salvo flak the last, and then I'd use my guns to finish off the third as I ran away, and I even got a second torpedo salvo off as I was entering into 3,000 to 4,000 meters, and then made a hasty getaway and killed 2 to 3 ships pretty consistently with that combination. But disruptor missile is going to be what kills the dreadnoughts for you, what kills the tacticals. These guys think they're so good with their modules and defense and tankiness and heel ball until you come in and disrupt them and ram them and ruin their day. Weapon booster missile, please forget about it. Just like the light particle turrets, pretend they don't exist. Don't even waste your time. Drain torpedo is just not a drain pulse. You can use it. It comes with it. It will be a good bookmark, a placeholder until you replace it with something better. Don't get the tier 4 version until you have nothing else to buy. It's not as good as Drain Pulse. Scramble Pulse will get you by. This is probably the last module you want to replace. You do want to replace it, but it's not as strong as it used to be because of the bug where it disabled the power wheel, but very, very handy. Come in, scramble, sow confusion, get your kill, get out. You do want to replace it, but it's the last thing you want to replace. Out of all these modules right here that you start out with the Vindicta, the flak turrets and the scramble pulse are the last ones you want to replace. You do want to replace the flak turrets 3 eventually to get that boost in damage, 400 DPS extra damage. But I wouldn't get the scramble pulse 4 because 3 is just as good, and there's so many excellent choices here, including Drain Pulse. Drain Pulse, just vicious. You go in, if your primary attack fails, you drain them, and you're probably going to drain a whole bunch of other guys around you, and then just flakfest, baby. Just do so much damage, and then get out safely. Anti-missile lasers can be pretty good on the Brutus and Vindicta because they are very susceptible to damage. Weapon Booster Pulse, Blitz Necro uses Weapon Booster Pulse, and so do other Vindicta captains because you can activate it when you're flakking right after a ram and do super duper damage, almost double. Almost double. If you're doing power to weapons to module amper your ram to get that 30% extra damage, and let's take a look at that for a second. Plasma ram plus 30% damage is a lot of damage. You're in the 30,000 range, and then with the last of your energy you can go ahead and weapon booster and get that extra damage, 600 damage, and get yourself in the 3,000 DPS range with your flak turrets. But Drain Pulse will take out shields very, very, very effectively. Highly recommended. Some captains do recommend the Weapon Booster Pulse. Protean Autoguns, some captains use the Protean Autoguns to get that extra damage, but you can't choose the target. So you can pick them up if you want. They are pretty cheap at tier 4, but my recommendation, Hell Lasers or Anti-Missile Defense if you want defense, but my top recommendation is Drain Pulse. But take your time with getting Drain Pulse because Scramble Pulse 3 will carry you while you're replacing these other modules. You want to get rid of Goliath Torpedo. You can use Drain Torpedo for a while, but you want to get rid of Jump Drive. Jump Drive will get you in, get you out. It's a decent placeholder, but you really want to replace it as soon as you can. Most captains are going to be using either Evasive Maneuvers or Thrust Amplifier. There's arguments for both. 25-second cooldown is kind of long, but 10-second duration is just fine, especially if you are doing power to engines and things like engine rigor, which is the officer briefing for the Vindicta. What a coincidence. The engine rigor gives you movement speed plus 100%, so you're going triple normal speed at less than triple energy use. In fact, much less than half. Great ability. So engine use, typically it's 1 per second. When power to engines, energy use will be plus 75%. Let's round up to 2 energy per second when you're using it to go triple speed, and then put thrust amplifier on top of that, movement speed increase 250%. You're going 5 times normal speed in this thing. That's crazy. Plus you get the speed bonus from ramming. Come on, this is how so many players get taken by surprise. Thrust amplifier, but after you use thrust amplifier, you have to wait half a minute to get it back. Where evasive maneuvers does give you that boost, but it's not as good, but it's more consistent. You can use it every 4 seconds and it will get you in and it'll get you out, but it's hard. You need to practice. It'll get you out very easily. You need to practice evasive maneuvers and ram together, because you almost have to offset the nose of your ship so that you can predict where evasive maneuver is going to dump you out and then get the ram. So you almost have to evasive, offset to the side of your target, and then evasive and ram, and you kind of make this weird arc. Kind of like almost a Tokyo drift. You skid into your target. But you can use it every 4 seconds, and many captains use evasive maneuvers on their Vindicta and Brutus, but many captains, maybe even more captains, used thrust amplifier. You can use stasis ammo, I guess, but why? Energy generator, same thing. It does have benefits, but why use it when you could be using thrust amplifier or evasive maneuver? You could do module reboot. I've seen some Vindicta captains use module reboot along with missile repeater or storm missiles or flashpoint torpedoes, but let's face it, the ram is where it's at. You don't have to worry about shields when you're doing ram. You don't have to worry about defensive when you're using rupture ram. And of course you have drain pulse, so even if your primary target is taken out, you can still use drain pulse on a secondary target, or if something goes wrong. You have flechettes for defense, but you probably want to be using disruptor missile, and you have evasive maneuver and thrust amplifier. So we're looking at a one-trick pony when it comes to the Vindicta. And the same thing goes for the Brutus, but man, what a trick. No other destroyer can do what the Oberon destroyers can do. No other ship can ram that well. And you've seen my replays using flashpoint torpedoes, which is basically the same thing, so it's kind of like a pony and a half, a 6-legged pony, if you will. Same thing with the Brutus. Rocket turrets, why bother? Light particle turrets, only if you're a bot, and you're not because you're watching this. Flak turrets is the way to go. Look at that damage. Oh my god, it's so good. And then we're going to go down to plasma ram, 30,000 damage with module amper. That will be 36,000 damage every 25 seconds. And if you kill your target by drain pulsing, flacking on the way in, and then the plasma ram was the last thing to touch their face before they exploded, you can go ahead and take 15 seconds off your cooldown, which means you are ramming every 10 seconds with a 10-second duration. You're just swimming around in plasma, blowing everything up that even touches your bow. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Or you can go the other way using rupture ram, almost as much damage. Roughly 24,000 damage with module amper, a longer cooldown, but if you're using module recycler, that's down to 20 seconds, still very respectable. And you are disabling any defensive armor modules they have, and in addition, adding a 20% damage buff to not just you, but everyone else shooting at them, which means if you rupture ram them first, then drain pulse, and then flak, you are doing excellent damage with the flak guns. Highly recommended for both of them. Or if you want more versatility and 360-degree fighting, where you're not sure you can land the rams as too close quarters, you're not very good at ramming, you can do flashpoint torpedo salvo 5, 24 1,000 damage. It doesn't go through shields, but it has a range of up to 1,400 meters with only a 35-second cooldown and a small blast radius too, because sometimes you can actually hit 2 to 3 ships with flashpoint torpedoes. I hit 2 artillery cruisers and 1 tactical cruiser at the same time with flashpoint torpedoes once. It was beautiful. But then again, Valorous Zero has multiple times clipped 2 ships with a plasma ram and taken them both out. So it's a beautiful thing. Then we have, of course, light flechettes. Look at the damage, look at the range, look at the cooldown. You can't go wrong with them, but they are not the premier choice. Your premier choice is Disruptor Missile to make sure your target can't do anything when you kill them. But if Disruptor Missile isn't working out for you, you can use Torpedo Salvo and be a true stealth bastard. You can fire these things at 3,000 meters, and then as you close at the last minute, do either flashpoint torpedoes or do an excellent ram, and the torpedoes land just when you're ramming in. It's so beautiful. Or you can kill one ship with a ram. You have a Corvette following you, fire torpedo salvos, get out of there, or use the torpedo salvo to get a quick double kill right after. Very, very effective. 15-second cooldown, which means if you kill something with one of your modules and you have module recycler, your torpedo salvos will be ready to go no matter what. So 9,000 damage, pretty darn good. 8 torpedoes. But I highly recommend Disruptor Missile. It's the way to go. But experiment with those torpedoes. You will be shocked and amazed how many double kills you get. We have Drain Pulse. It is the way to go for most builds, but you can also use Weapon Booster Pulse like Blitz Necro. He gets a lot of kills with that. You can use Hell Lasers to defend yourself. Same thing with anti-missile lasers, but really Drain Pulse is what most captains use. Again, you can get triple kills this way. You can ram one poor slob, then kill an artillery cruiser or a Corvette with torpedo salvo, and then go in and Drain Pulse someone who's got 1/3 health and they're just nursing their shields trying to get out of there. You take those shields away, boom, 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 with flak turrets, and it's all over. 3 kills under your belt. And who cares if you die at that point? You've already almost annihilated half the enemy team. Stasis ammo, very good. This is a very good module for secondary builds on the Vindicta because you can go around with the Vindicta and the Brutus and stasis corvettes. When you get those teams of 3-4 corvettes, you just swim around using engine rigger, power to engines, or you can use navigation expert, power to engines, fly around, zip, 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 hit some poor Corvette, or even multiple Corvettes if you're good. You can just hit them with that stasis ammo and then get in there, flak them after a Drain Pulse. It's all over. No Corvette can withstand that kind of firepower. You take away their shields, then you put 4 of those nasty flak hits into them. You're doing 20 to 30,000 damage. It's just over. And you're going to love every minute of it. Or you can use evasive maneuvers to help you get both in and out of problems. Or you can use thrust amplification so that you can speed in and take people completely unaware with your plasma ram. So, again, 6-legged pony, if you will, a 1.5 trick pony. But you can do some other builds with the Brutus and the Vindicta. It is still a fine ship. It is made out of paper and will fold like a lawn chair if it's hit with any sort of concentrated firepower. But it's the opposite end of the spectrum of the other 2 destroyers. The real destroyer that you probably want to invest into if you like destroyer gameplay is Akula Vector, even if you're a Jupiter Arms fan, because Akula Vector offers very, very similar gameplay with more options because of its health. It isn't as fast, its guns don't do as much damage, but look at the hull on this thing. But you really have to be using very good map usage and cover because you are the artillery cruiser's wet dream. You are a big, fat, juicy target that can't use armor amplifier or armor booster pulse to mitigate their damage, so you have to be very, very careful. But when used properly, the Gora, the Blood, and the Dola are monsters. Of course, if you started like I did with the first destroyer, it's the Jupiter Arms, and you have to play it correctly. It's fun at Tier 1, Tier 2 to get in there and use Goliath torpedoes, but it's really child's play Once you graduate to Tier 3, you want to put those things behind you and start working at your long to medium range DPS supported by missiles. And then once you get to Tier 4, Tier 5, you're going to be using evasive maneuver to keep the distance between you or your enemy. And you are going to be using, if not that, stasis ammo to kill corvettes. And you're going to be using things like Scylla torpedo, missile repeater, Tempest missiles, along with flechettes or disruptor missile or torpedoes. And that is just fine. So it's a fine machine, very, very small hitbox. Many Jupiter armed ships do better than they should on paper because of this very narrow, small hitbox, especially Jupiter arms tactical cruisers. Very, very hard to hit. They're very, very speedy. Decent average armor and superior firepower. So we're going to cut the video off there. I hope this helped you on your journey to legendary gameplay. It is the road to ledge, and I am going to break these videos into 5 parts because even though everyone loved the State of the Meta video, it was rather long, and I wanted to keep these into bite-sized morsels so you guys can enjoy them and, of course, get better or bring other ships into legendary even if you already have ships that are Tier 4, Tier 5. So I hope this helped. Please leave your feedback below in the comments or any ideas for additional builds I might have glossed over. Again, please be creative, build your own builds, but I am showing you the most effective meta modules to get you to Tier 4, Tier 5, and after you get that done, you can move on to another ship. And if you're a huge destroyer fan like many of us are, including Scroat, many people don't know this, but Scroat's favorite ship besides the Jupiter Arms Corvette is the Athos. So many, many people have favorite ships, but why not invest in other ships as well? If you're a destroyer fan, get the Aquila Vector and get the Oberon destroyers. Complete your collection and be the master of DPS for the game of Dreadnought. Well, that's it from me for now, and I'll see you soon in Sinley Bay.